June 1944. The jungles of New Guinea trembled with the thunder of aircraft engines. Day after day, American pilots climbed into their P-38 Lightnings, streaking across the sky toward enemy territory. They were young, fearless, and determined. But each mission was a gamble. Fuel was scarce. Engines overheated. Every extra minute in the air could mean death. Then one day, a man walked into their dusty jungle base. He wasn't a general, not even a soldier. He was a civilian. And within 6 weeks, this outsider would teach America's best fighter group a trick so powerful, it nearly doubled their range and changed how the US fought the air war in the Pacific. This is how Charles Lindbergh, a man banned from wearing a military uniform, made the P-38 Lightning almost untouchable. Before we dive in, if you love real stories from World War II, the kind that sound too strange to be true, hit subscribe and like this video. Because today, we're uncovering one of the most unexpected, brilliant, and controversial moments of the entire Pacific War. June 26, 1944, Hollandia Air Base, Dutch New Guinea. The sun beat down over a muddy strip carved from the jungle. Mosquitoes buzzed, mechanics shouted over the rumble of generators, and the smell of oil filled the air. Inside a small makeshift recreation hut, Lieutenant Colonel Charles MacDonald, commander of the 475th Fighter Group, sat at a wooden table finishing a game of checkers. That's when a stranger appeared in the doorway. Tall, quiet, his face instantly recognizable. "Colonel MacDonald," he said. "My name is Charles Lindbergh." MacDonald blinked. The Charles Lindbergh, the man who had flown solo across the Atlantic 17 years earlier, now stood in front of him, asking permission to fly combat missions with his unit. The room went silent. Lindbergh was a civilian. He had no uniform, no rank, and technically, no right to even be there. But the way he carried himself made it hard to say no. That day, MacDonald agreed to something that would soon rewrite the rules of aerial warfare. To understand why Lindbergh was there, we have to go back almost 2 decades. In May 1927, he made history, flying solo from New York to Paris in the spirit of St. Louis. No radio, no radar, no co-pilot, just a compass, a map, and his calculations. He crossed 3,600 miles in 33 hours, landing with barely 85 gallons of fuel left. That flight didn't just make him famous, it made him obsessed. He realized something powerful. Fuel efficiency wasn't just about saving gas, it was about survival. Through the 1930s, Lindbergh worked with Pan American Airways, charting long-range routes over oceans, calculating power settings, and experimenting with every drop of performance an aircraft engine could give. By the time World War II began, he knew more about fuel management than almost anyone alive. But that knowledge came with baggage. Before the war, Lindbergh had become a controversial figure. He spoke openly against America joining the conflict in Europe. He believed the US wasn't ready for war, and that isolation was safer. Those speeches made headlines, and enemies. President Franklin D. Roosevelt despised him, calling him sympathetic to the Nazis. So when Pearl Harbor was attacked and Lindbergh tried to rejoin the military, his request was denied. He was banned from service. Most men would have walked away, but not Lindbergh. He still wanted to serve, even without a uniform. He began working as a technical consultant for several aircraft companies, studying designs, testing engines, and quietly finding his way back toward the warfront. That's how he ended up in the Pacific in 1944, officially as an observer. Unofficially, he was there to fly. When Lindbergh first arrived, he joined missions with Marine Corsair squadrons. He wasn't just watching, he was flying. And not easy runs either. He went on bombing missions, strafing enemy barges, all while teaching pilots how to carry heavier payloads safely. Even as a civilian, he proved calm under fire, professional, fearless, and analytical. But when he heard about the P-38 Lightning, his curiosity turned into obsession. A twin-engine fighter with turbo superchargers, capable of climbing faster than anything else in the Pacific. The P-38 was already a legend, But it had one fatal flaw: limited range. That's what Lindbergh wanted to fix. The 475th Fighter Group, known as Satan's Angels, was the elite of the elite. Their pilots were confident, skilled, and young, most in their 20s. When word spread that the old Atlantic guy was joining them, many laughed. A 42-year-old civilian teaching them how to fly. Not a chance. But MacDonald gave him a chance anyway. The next morning, Lindbergh climbed into a P-38. He taxied out, throttled up, and took off into the jungle sky. Formation flying like he'd done it all his life. He flew combat missions, strafed enemy barges, and returned cool and composed every time. But what stunned everyone was what happened when they checked his plane. While the other pilots landed nearly dry on fuel, Lindbergh still had half his tanks full. Something was different. He wasn't flying faster. He wasn't flying higher. He was flying smarter. A few days later, Colonel MacDonald called a meeting. Inside a rough wreck hut with a dirt floor and a single light bulb swinging overhead, the group's best pilots gathered. MacDonald stood next to Lindbergh and said simply, "Tell them how you're doing it." Lindbergh took the floor and began explaining like a teacher. He told them most pilots flew at 2,200 RPM, with the fuel mixture set to auto-rich. That burned massive amounts of fuel. He suggested lowering RPM to 1,600, switching to auto-lean, and increasing manifold pressure slightly to keep power steady. Same performance, less fuel. Simple math, but revolutionary thinking. The pilots exchanged confused looks. That went against everything they'd been taught. Flying over square, using higher pressure with lower RPM, was considered dangerous. It could destroy the engines. But Lindbergh had already tested it in combat, and his plane was running cooler, cleaner, and longer. He had broken the rules, and proved the rules were wrong. At first, the squadron was hesitant. They tried Lindbergh's method on short patrols, then on longer flights. To their surprise, the engines ran smoother, temperatures stayed stable, and fuel consumption dropped dramatically. Soon, those impossible long-range missions, the ones that used to end with planes ditching at sea, became routine. The P-38's range had just increased by almost 400 miles, enough to reach new Japanese targets, escort bombers deeper into enemy territory, and still make it home safely. For the first time, the US had a fighter that could dominate anywhere in the Pacific. By July 1944, Lindbergh was no longer just a guest. He was flying regularly with Satan's Angels, respected, even admired. Then came the day that sealed his place in history. During a patrol, the group spotted a Japanese light bomber, a Kawasaki Ki-51 Sonya, below them. Lindbergh dove head-on, guns blazing. The P-38 shuddered as its 20mm cannons roared. In seconds, the enemy plane erupted into flames and spiraled into the sea. It was Lindbergh's first and only confirmed kill. Unofficial, of course, since civilians weren't supposed to be in combat. But among the men, word spread fast. The old man got one. 3 days later, he narrowly survived a dogfight with a Japanese Zero. His coolness under fire only strengthened his legend. Soon after, US command ordered him home, officially for safety. Unofficially, because they didn't want the newspapers finding out a civilian was outperforming combat pilots. When Lindbergh left the Pacific, his method stayed behind. Pilots shared it squadron to squadron until every P-38 unit across the theater was using it. By the end of 1944, his fuel-saving technique had become standard practice. It extended range by over 30%, cut losses, and made deep escort missions possible during MacArthur's return to the Philippines. He had changed the way the US fought the air war, not with weapons, but with understanding. For a man once called a traitor, it was redemption. He'd gone from national hero to outcast to secret savior. Charles Lindbergh didn't invent a new engine or weapon. He simply looked at what already existed and saw how to use it better. He proved that sometimes one person with the right knowledge can change the course of a war. The P-38 Lightning went from a fuel-hungry fighter to the longest-range escort in the Pacific, all because one civilian dared to question the rules. And that's the hidden power of innovation in war. Not always built from steel, but born from ideas. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe for more true World War II tales. Stories of courage, genius, and the unexpected heroes history almost forgot. Because sometimes, the most powerful weapons of war aren't forged in factories. They're born in the minds of men who refuse to follow the rules.